Good evening, everyone. Good evening, brothers and sisters on live stream, the other medias. Thank you, Sister Julia. I praise the Lord for being here another day amongst you to fellowship in God's holy word, in his words of inspiration. So our topic of discussion for this evening is going to be on the divine nature. I don't know how often we think about this, but this is the goal, the whole point of why God has sent his Spirit in order to restore his image, the image of God in man, and as well as to attain to the righteousness of Christ. But we have to take on the nature of Christ, the nature of God, in order to get to that point. And yes, we sometimes are slow in making that progression, in taking those steps. If you continue to take one step forward and two steps back, will you ever reach your destination? If you take two steps forward and one step back, would you eventually reach your destination? You will, but it would take longer. And this is where we find ourselves. So for just a thought of meditation, Psalm 19:1. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Do we think about God in the things that we see around us in nature, or when we look up in the firmament or the sky in heaven? I'm sure we do think of his glory. We think of his goodness. We think of his manifold blessings. But what about in unlikely places? We know God in everything that has to do with nature is perfect. God in nature. These are lessons that our children need to learn. To the little child, not yet capable of learning from the printed page or of being introduced to the routine of the schoolroom, nature presents an unfailing source of instruction and delight. The heart, not yet hardened by contact with evil, is quick to recognize the presence that pervades all created things. The ear, as yet undulled by the world's clamor, is attentive to the voice that speaks through nature's utterances. And for those of older years, needing continually its silent reminders of the spiritual and eternal, nature's teaching will be no less a source of pleasure and of instruction. As the dwellers in Eden learned from nature's pages, as Moses discerned God's handwriting on the Arabian plains and mountains, and the child Jesus on the hillsides of Nazareth, so the children of today may learn of him. The unseen is illustrated by the seen. On everything upon the earth, from the loftiest tree of the forest to the lichen that clings to the rock, from the boundless ocean to the tiniest shell on the shore, they may behold the image and superscription of God. Everything in nature bears the image and superscription of God. Now, we're going to take Sister Julia's prayer as our prayer. When I read this statement, I came across something that caused me to meditate on and actually look into and study a little bit about. And that's, of course, is what you see highlighted. The lichen that clings to the rock. Now, what is a lichen? I never heard of it. Didn't realize that I have seen it before, but didn't know what it was. See, these little things in nature can escape us. And these little things in nature all points back to God. These little things in nature bear his image and superscription. Every little thing in nature is perfect. So what are lichens? Lichens are a complex life form. Now, it's not a plant. It's an organism, meaning it's a living thing. So it's a complex life form that is a symbiotic partnership between two separate organisms, a fungus and an alga. The dominant partner is the fungus, which gives the lichen the majority of its characteristics, from its shape to its fruiting bodies. The alga can be either a green alga or a blue-green alga, otherwise known as cyanobacteria. Many lichens will have both types of algae. And I'll play this video, not all of it, just a little bit of it, just to give you a picture of what these are. And we see it all the time around us, on the trees and even on the ground amongst the leaves.
Actually is a lichen. So for a long time people thought that they were plants because they don't move around like animals and they seem to grow and they're green, so they grow on things a bit like plants do sometimes. But they're not plants at all when you look at them microscopically. So what we tend to say is that a lichen is a symbiotic association of firstly a fungus, which is providing the structure of the lichen, and secondly, a single-celled photosynthetic organism, such as an alga. The photosynthesizing organism might also be a cyanobacterium, and some lichens will have an alga and a cyanobacterium. And then quite recently, in the last few years, it's been discovered that some lichens also have a second fungus as part of the integral part of the ecosystem. So they can be quite complicated organisms. So here we have a red oak tree, Quercus rubra. This tree, as you can see, is supporting a wide variety of different lichens, lots of different colours and textures. There's lots of lichens here, but we often categorise them very broadly into three types, so three growth forms. And the first growth form here is at the top, and this is showing what we call technically the fruticose growth form, which is sometimes called a shrubby growth form. You can see why it's called shrubby. It's going out bushy like a shrub. It is attached from one point to the substrate, to the bark, and then it branches out in all directions, making up good use of the space available. The second growth form is what we call foliose or leafy. It has a flatter sort of look, like a leaf, flat one side and then another side. So it has a top side and a bottom side. And if you get a knife, you can just get under that and reveal it's got a bottom side like that. The last form that we can see on this tree is what we call crustose, or you could say crusty. They're growing directly onto the bark. There's really no underside. The underside is the bark in effect. So you can't peel it off. The only way you could remove it is by cutting the bark.
All right, so these are the types of lichens that you may see around. Some grow from the ground up, some grow on the trees, as we just saw, and some grow on rocks. You see them on the mountainsides, or you see them down at the seashore on rocks. You see them growing on hard surfaces as well. God's voice in his handiwork. Wherever we turn, we hear the voice of God and behold his handiwork. From the solemn roll of the deep-toned thunder and old ocean's ceaseless roar, to the glad songs that make the forest vocal with melody, nature's 10,000 voices speak his praise. In earth and sea and sky, with their marvelous tint and color, varying in gorgeous contrast or blended in harmony, we behold his glory. The everlasting hills tell of his power. The trees that wave their green banners in the sunlight, and the flowers in their delicate beauty point to their creator. The living green that carpets the brown earth tells of God's care for the humblest of his creatures. The caves of the sea and the depths of the earth reveal his treasures. He who placed the pearls in the ocean and the amethyst and chrysolite among the rocks is a lover of the beautiful. The sun rising in the heavens is a representative of him who is the life and light of all that he has made. All the brightness and beauty that adorn the earth and light up the heavens speak of God. We think of this, God's handiwork in nature. If that's the case then, and everything is perfection when it comes to God in nature, child guidance lets us know, as the things of nature show their appreciation of the master worker by doing their best to beautify the earth and to represent God's perfection, so human beings should strive in their sphere to represent God's perfection, allowing him to work out through them his purposes of justice, mercy, and goodness. And we are asked to be what? Perfect, right? Even as our Father, which is in heaven, is perfect, right? Obedience to God is how we can get there. Obedience to God in all of his laws, his commandments, and his requirements. The same power that upholds nature is working also in man. The same great laws that guide like the star and the atom control human life. The laws that govern the heart's actions, regulating the flow of the circuit of life to the body, are the laws of the mighty intelligence that has the jurisdiction of the soul. From him all life proceeds. Only in harmony with him can be found its true sphere of action. For all the objects of his creation, the condition is the same: a life sustained by receiving the life of God, a life exercised in harmony with the Creator's will. To transgress his law, physical, mental, or moral, is to place oneself out of harmony with the universe, to introduce discord, anarchy, and ruin. Now, we may do this on a small scale when we take ourselves out of harmony with God's will. And each time we disobey, that's what we do. Again, it's not on some grand scale, but in our little sphere, those who we are influenced, those who we are around, those who we are in contact with, those who we impact, we are disrupting and causing ruin and discord on a small scale. And it has great consequences because it can lead to the loss of souls, let alone your own. And this is why we have to be careful. And when we talk about being obedient to God's law, it means being obedient in every particular, in every way, obeying the requirements, all of them. The issue with us is that we resist at times. The material world is under God's control. The laws of nature are obeyed by nature. Everything speaks and acts the will of the Creator. Cloud and sunshine, dew and rain, wind and storm, all are under the supervision of God and yield implicit obedience to his command. It is in obedience to the law of God that the spire of grain bursts through the ground. First the blade, then the ear, after that the full corn in the ear. These the Lord develops in their proper season because they do not resist his working. And can it be that man, made in the image of God, endowed with reason and speech, shall alone be unappreciative of his gifts and disobedient to his will? Shall rational beings alone cause confusion in our world? And we see that's what's happening. Mass confusion because of disobedience to his will. And we think about it. Is this why sometimes we have a little confusion among ourselves? Because of our disobedience to his will? Now, some might say, well, what was this like in example all about? Well, liking is a symbiotic relationship between two separate organisms living together in peace and harmony. One not trying to destroy the other, but one can't live without the other. They both need each other. So liken this to the divine nature, the human nature combined with the divine nature. Two different species, two different organisms, so to speak, coming together and living in a harmonious, peaceful environment. So if we take on the divine nature and be one with God, and we're all doing that, then we all will be what? We all will be one in peace and harmony. So it starts with us as individuals. Now, I recommend and suggest, because this is where my meditation led me to the study of 2 Peter chapter number 1. And inspiration tells us that in 2 Peter chapter number 1 is where we're asked to be partakers of the divine nature. And this is the key to victory, as inspiration tells us. The keynote of victory. The first chapter of 2 Peter is full of instruction and strikes the keynote of victory. The truth is impressively forced upon the mind by the way it is presented in this chapter. Let us more abundantly recommend the study of these words and the practicing of these precepts. And we're not going to go through the whole chapter, but there's a few of the verses that I want us to focus on. 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. According as his divine power hath given unto us all things that pertain unto life and godliness, through the knowledge of him that hath called us to glory and virtue, whereby are given unto us exceeding great and precious promises, that by these ye might be partakers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is in the world through lust. So it's by taking hold of the promises. Notice it says that by these what? By these precious promises, these exceeding great and precious promises. By these we may be partakers of the divine nature. So it's taking hold of the exceeding great and precious promises that will help us or allow us to become or be partakers of the divine nature. And we know the promises of God are many and they are vast, but one sure promise is the restoration of his image in us. Isn't that what he's waiting on? All promises lead to that. All promises lead to us attaining to the divine nature and obtaining to the full stature of Christ, taking on his righteousness fully in our lives. Now, again, it starts with us as individuals. We have to take on his nature. We have to allow the nature that we have to be transformed. He doesn't take away our personality. He doesn't take away our individuality, but he makes us one with him. He makes us a better version of ourselves. And if he makes a better version of me, and he makes a better version of you, and I am connected with him, and you are connected with him, then we will be connected with one another. And then the work can speedily go forward. Partakers of the divine nature. As we partake of the divine nature, hereditary and cultivated tendencies to wrong are cut away from the character, and we are made a living power for good. Ever learning of the divine teacher, daily partaking of his nature, we cooperate with God in overcoming Satan's temptations. God works and man works, that man may be one with Christ as Christ is one with God. Then we sit together with Christ in heavenly places. The mind rests with peace and assurance in Jesus. As we follow on to know the Lord, we shall lead souls to the living word. With us, they will know that his going forth is prepared as the morning. And this is what we want. We want the hereditary and cultivated tendencies to be cut away. This is what hinders our development of attaining to his likeness and taking on his nature. We tend to hold on to these hereditary and cultivated tendencies, and that slows down the progress. So if it slows down the progress in me and it slows down the progress in you, then it slows down our progress with our connection with God. If my progress is being slowed down and your progress is being slowed down, then our progress of being one is being slowed down as well. And thus, what? The slowing down of the work. Because we know this work is dual. It's simultaneous. It is the changing and transforming of us after the likeness of Christ, taking on his righteousness, taking on being partakers of his nature, as well as working for our brethren. It's a simultaneous. We're being changed while we're working for the Lord to save others. Okay. In his word, God reveals what he can do for human beings. He molds and fashions after the divine similitude the characters of those who will wear his yoke. Through his grace, they are made partakers of the divine nature and are thus enabled to overcome the corruption that is in the world through lust. It is God who gives us power to overcome. Those who hear his voice and obey his commandments are enabled to form righteous characters. Those who disregard his express commands will form characters like the propensities that they indulge. Whatever propensities those are, whatever bad traits and habits that you have, you continue to indulge in them, then that's the character you're going to be fixed in. And you know, some of us have carried a lot of those propensities with us even till today that are fixed in our character, that it takes a master surgeon in order to surgically remove it. The problem is we try to do it ourselves. And when we do it ourselves, we blunder. You know, we like trying to do surgery on someone or on ourselves, and we just totally butchering ourselves. This is what we want. We want to be joined and united. All who receive Christ by faith become one with him. The branches are not tied to the vine. They are not joined to it by any mechanical process or artificial fastening. They are united to the vine so as to become part of it. They are nourished by the roots of the vine. So those who receive Christ by faith become one with him in principle and action. They are united to him, and the life they live is the life of the Son of God. They derive their life from him who is life. This is where it starts, being joined and united, having that intimate, close relationship with him. Can we conceive of a closer, more intimate relation to Christ than is set forth in the words, I am the vine, ye are the branches? The fibers of the branch are almost identical with those of the vine. Thus, we like Christ. The communication of life, strength, and fruitfulness from the trunk of the branches is unobstructed and constant. What obstructs that flow is the hereditary and cultivated tendencies. It disrupts the nourishment that our souls, our spirits, that we are to get in order to develop after his likeness and to develop into being like him. And to being like him, as it says here, being identical. The branches are identical with the vine. And that's what we want to be. We're the branches. He is the vine. We want to be identical to him. But sometimes life gets us down. Sometimes we get discouraged. Sometimes we let our hereditary and cultivated tendencies and our propensities to hinder us, to disrupt that flow, to obstruct that flow. So sometimes we're going through struggles. You know, struggles is what God uses to plant you in so that you can grow. But in those struggles, sometimes we get discouraged and we want to give up. We think that everything is over. But if we hold on and change our attitude and trust in the Lord, believing that our trials and our struggles come to make us strong, then we'll be able to grow like this plant here. We'll be able to grow and be strong. And you know what else? We will have the root, as we read in the previous statement, where the nourishment comes from the root. The root that is Christ, and the root that we have in us, whatever God puts in us, you know, he light us every man that cometh to the fold, into the world. He gives every man a measure of faith, whatever that is. If you hold on to it and continue to let it grow, you will have such a root so complex that no one can tear it apart. And it would look something like this. What you see in this complex version of the root of these trees. What do you see there? You see two hands shaking. That's how strong that this root system that these true trees have. They holding and bearing each other up by the root. Strong root. No wind, no storm, nothing to be able to blow them down. And even if one was to kind of tilt and be ready to fall over, the root of the other, that connection they have, will keep it up. Do we do that for each other? See, we have to, in order to attach, we have to detach. In order to attach to Christ, we have to detach from our hereditary and cultivated propensities. When this intimacy of connection and communion is formed, this root system, they must have a change of heart. They must submit their own will to the will of God. There will be a struggle with outward and internal obstacles. There must be a painful work of detachment as well as a work of attachment. Pride, selfishness, vanity, worldliness, sin in all its forms must be overcome if we would enter into a union with Christ. The reason why many find the Christian life so deplorably hard, why they are so fickle, so variable, is that they try to attach themselves to Christ without first detaching themselves from these cherished idols, from our hereditary and cultivated tendencies. We try to attach to Christ with these things, and it'll never work. You have to detach yourself first before you can attach. There is a wide difference between a pretended union and a real connection with Christ by faith. A profession of the truth places men in the church, but this does not prove that they have a vital connection with the living vine. A rule is given by which the true disciple may be distinguished from those who claim to follow Christ, but have not faith in him. The one class are fruit-bearing, the other fruitless. The one are often subjected to the pruning knife of God that they may bring forth more fruit. The other, as withered branches, are ere long to be severed from the living vine. I don't know if you all remember this little game here. This game was a game of precision. My mom got us, me and my sister, this game when we were kids. And you have this electronic prong that you see here. And you flip a card and the card tells you what you need to take out. And you get points for it. So if you want to take out the rib, you had to use this precision instrument. And on the sides here, right around the edges of each item is metal. And these prongs here was metal. So if you go in and try to get it and you touch the sides with the metal, it'll go burn. His nose will light up red. That means you lost your turn. So you have to try to go in there and get it without touching the sides and having his nose become red. You know, This is what we try to do to ourselves. We try to operate on ourselves. We try to detach ourselves from our hereditary and cultivated tendencies. We can't do it. We read in the statement before that it is by the power of God. It is by divine grace. It's the only way that we'll be able to overcome our hereditary cultivated tendencies. As reformers who, by the grace of God, are being brought back to the old forms, the patterns of thought, speech, and behavior reflecting the principles of righteousness, we shall measure our faith, our growth, by our change in ideas, theories, habits, and practices. Change, never a natural, easy attainment in any area of life, is a painful operation in the individual life. To change wrong habits and theories and their resultant wrong habits and practices with which one has grown up is surgical. Even so with the simple and humble, and insufferably more so with the proud and opinionated. Only the wondrous working of divine grace can successfully perform the operation, bring the soul through to a new and more abundant life. The reason so many Christians, Adventists, and Davidians find this surgery so insufferable is simply that they are in the hands of the wrong surgeon. The great physician and surgeon gives grace to enable us to endure the operation. Every change in ideas and theories, habits, and practices that we must make dear unto the end. My grace, God's grace, is sufficient for thee. But in the puny and impotent hands of self, because we're always trying to operate on ourselves, even worse, in the cruel hands of Satan, the effort to change results again and again in excruciating butchery and torture of our own souls. When we try to do surgery on yourself, you're going to butcher yourself. Heaven looks down grievously upon the sorry spectacle of professing reformers actually performing as deformers or hypocrites or both, and sadly says, those who come up to the Bible standard, the Bible description of Christ's followers, will be found rare indeed. Many, many to unlearn, for those who in their own effort are going about to establish their own righteousness. This unlearning of many, many things makes reformation an ordeal that is a species of torture. Only to the born again, fully surrendered soul is genuine reformation possible, effectual, and a joy and rejoicing. And that's from the Bashan Communicator, Volume 8, Number 2, pages 29 and 30. All right. So, we are a family. We are one in the Spirit. But we have to be one with Christ before we can effectively be one with one another and then be that power that he wants us to be to go into the world. First, the church. Ephesians 4:4-7 tells us that we are one body. We are one spirit, even as ye are called in one hope of your calling. There's one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in you all. But unto every one of us is given grace according to the measure of the gift of Christ. We are one family. We root ourselves in God. We can be rooted with each other. We can be there to encourage and uplift one another. Where we have God, Jesus, our Savior, with the gift of the Holy Spirit, you and me connected with that trio, one with God and one with one another. And it's a full circle. It's a full circle. So may the Lord help us to be this family, help us to be the people that he's calling us to be, help us to attain to this divine nature by first right now being partakers of the divine nature and attaining to the full righteousness and stature of Christ. God bless you.